Okay, so let's see which of the strategies I was able to use so far. Okay, what did you notice? Okay, so problem solving. Which of the cognitive restructuring strategies?
Alternative interpretation.
Yeah. So I think for Karen, it seemed like she presented a lot of things that led to alternative interpretation because she has such a narrow, pessimistic way of thinking. Her beliefs are so active and they color so much of what she thinks that alternative interpretation seems to come up real easily. Okay, what else?
What's the evidence?
Okay, so what's the evidence? Okay, and when I asked her, when we pointed out the thought and then what would be evidence for it, what would be evidence against it, and then she was given it as a homework assignment, it's a behavioral experiment. Okay, so we'd have to check in on it again. All right? So, I didn't do a what if, and that probably could have been done in that we could have said something like, so, with predicting like something with Carrie in the future. Could have been, so what would be the best thing that could happen? What would be the worst? What's the most realistic? So that might have worked with some of her negative predictions about the future. I was thinking ahead of time that I was going to be able to use what would I tell my best friend, and use Alan as the person, but it didn't present itself. But I think that would have been a possibility. And then there was some kind of just pointing out to her the incongruity between her beliefs and the way things were presented. So, as Karen, what was your experience of being on that other end of having your thinking challenged?
Oh, during the role play?
Uh-huh.
It borders, I think, for her being invalidated. I think she doesn't get any support for anything she says. She's constantly being challenged. That's not what that means, because her aunt and her grandma, I think, are on her a lot of the time about that.
Uh-huh.
That's not true, and that kind of thing. And so anytime I would walk down the alternative explanations, she would have one. And so I think from her perspective, when we were doing role-playing, it would feel like, it would feel a little bit invalidating.
So I'm glad that you raised that. So what would be really important to do is make sure that I'm very open and positive and have a really good relationship with you, so that you would recognize it as not me invalidating you, but just getting you to think about things in a little different way. And but that's a subtle difference between the two, isn't it? Between somebody just saying you're wrong in the way you think versus somebody helping you to discover that there are times when you're wrong. And that there's that person that's helping you to discover it really does care about you and isn't discounting you.
And I think that's, when the alternatives are coming up, you almost kind of scramble, being the kid, you scramble to say, well, that's what I meant. I don't want to be in the wrong here. I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to go with this one because you're leading me to that. That is probably just this. I think that would have been her natural reaction.
So it'd be important to watch for the extent to which she really believes it and to gauge that.
Speaking,
And then the other thing that would be really important would be to the check-in at the end to see if there was anything that I said that felt bad. And then you would hope that she would bring up if she did feel invalidated. Okay. All right. So, any other thoughts or questions? Okay. So let's go on to the self-map activity. Okay. So one of the things that we were trying to do is to, well, it's kind of like the Karen example in that she looks at her own worth a lot based on appearance. And so what we want to do is help the kids to see that they're much more than that one thing that they kind of focus in on. And so the self-map is a way to do that. And what we'll commonly do is we identify areas of the child's life that are important to him or her, like their grades, how they are as a friend, the extracurricular activities they're involved in, seeing themselves as a son or a daughter, as a sibling, as a grandchild, in their appearance, possessions, clothes, intelligence, sense of humor, and on and on. And so with the self-map, each of these little circles represent one of those areas. So this might be self as a student. This might be self as an athlete. This might be self as a son or daughter, etc. Okay? So then what you end up doing is you end up getting the child's looking at evidence for how the child's doing in each of those areas. So that that kind of center that this all comes out from is the bigger whole that has each of these different aspects of the person. So we end up getting information from the parents. And so we'll call the parents and ask them, what are the things that you really cherish about your child? And then we talk to the kids' teachers and we ask them, what are the things that you've noticed that are really good about this student? And then we ask the other, if we do it in the group, what are the things that you all really enjoy about this person as a group member? And with the teachers and the kids, we have it written down. Parents, we usually have to get it over the phone. But if we're doing parent meetings, we get it written down. Okay? And we ask them about how they see that child in these different areas. And so each meeting, we get the kids to fill in one of these areas with things that they've noticed that they like about themselves or that they notice is good about them. And then we give them the evidence from their teacher, from their peers, from their parents, and they read it. And a lot of the kids are shocked because they didn't realize how positively the other people really thought about them. So that creates really pretty powerful evidence that's positive about them. And it creates it in a variety of different realms. And so remember earlier when we had the talk, I think it might have been about Karen, or maybe it was someone else, that the reason why other kids could feel good about themselves, even if they weren't good at soccer, was because
they had other areas of success.
They had other areas of success. So that's the idea here is even if someone doesn't feel so good about what's this area, they have all these other areas that they are good in or that they can see good things about themselves. And so it helps them to build a more balanced kind of sense of self instead of just focusing on, oh, I'm bad because, and I don't feel good about myself because it's this one thing. But even within that one thing, we strive to find ways that the person can still see themselves in a positive light. So you had mentioned appearance. So a lot of the girls were saying that they didn't like the way that they looked. And then the therapist did a really nice job of identifying, so the girls that felt bad about their appearance would still feel good about some aspect of their appearance. Like they thought, oh, I have really great hair, or my eyes are really pretty, or whatever it was, the therapist and the other group members could help them find things that were positive. Yeah.
I just want to mention, I use a similar thing.
Oh, yeah.
Because in one of the groups I have 31, which it can be like,
Wow.
So, and you can't go delve in too much. And calling the teachers and it can be difficult. What I have them do to create group cohesion is everyone gets a sheet of paper with everyone's name on it. And they have to write something positive about everybody. And even though they're new, they may say she has nice shoes or they're like, his hair. And then I collect it. And then the following week, each one of them gets a card. And I try and have it sealed so that it's waterproof. And it's everything that everyone has said about them. It has their name on it.
Yeah.
And all these nice things.
That's really nice.
And I had one student tell me, because he had suicidal thoughts of it, he looked at that card all the time to see that he was worthwhile. So
That's really cool.
And it's a way for group members to, I guess it focuses on the positive. You can't put something negative, the rule is you can't put something negative about someone, you have to find something about them negative.
So it works in a number of ways, and one of the ways that you're mentioning that it works is that it provides evidence about them and that's positive. And for the boy who was suicidal, it may have been something that helped him to kind of hold on because it helped him to combat those negative thoughts that he had.
Yeah, I deliberately make it wallet size so that it's portable. So that they can
that's great. Very good. So one of the things it's a really good example of a strategy that you commonly use with cognitive restructuring, and that is when you restructure a thought or a belief, you have the person write it out and then take it with them. So that way they can pull it out. The next time they have that thought, they can pull out their alternative thought and remind themselves, oh, wait a minute, that's just the muck monster talking or whatever. This is the more realistic way of thinking. So that's really nice. It's a portable therapist. That's good. Yeah.
It's very effective, and it creates group cohesion. Find something in common or something that they like about it.
Yeah, it's a nice strategy. Good. Okay, so that's the self-map activity. It goes on for a number of weeks, and it seems to work pretty well. Let's say that one of the kids identifies an area of weakness, and they're really not satisfied with themselves in this area. What are we going to do? Yeah, we're going to problem solve it. Okay, so you don't think that you're good enough at whatever. We're going to come up with a plan that's going to help you to improve in that specific area. And what do we know about the impact of mastery activities? Elevates mood. Okay. All right, so let's move on. oh, we were going to practice with partners. And everybody cringed about that. But I think time-wise, we may not have adequate time to be able to do that. Let's see, 2:28. 3:15 is our next break?
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock, okay. All right. If we have time in the end, after we talk about the parent training, we'll come back and practice as in pairs, okay? Everybody's going, wow, I hope we'd run out of time. Okay. All right. So the purpose of the parent training component is that we want to change the milieu that the child's in, and we want to create a more positive environment. We want to change any dysfunctional parenting practices and interactions. We want to move away from a coercive, kind of punitive environment. And we want to improve family problem solving, improve communication, reduce conflict, improve the child's involvement in decision making, foster positive self-esteem, and change interactions that support maladaptive beliefs. Okay, so if we were to deal with the Karen case, you could see how conflict would be so easy in that family because Karen's approach to talking with the aunt was what?
Jump at her.
Yeah, it's really pretty accusatory. And you could see how someone who would see that as disrespectful. And so really, I didn't go there yet, but, and I'm really glad I didn't because she has that tendency to see things as invalidating. So, but you could see how Karen contributes to the problems that are going on within the family and the conflict that exists. In part, it's because of the way that she thinks about things and expects and does all that mind reading. In part, it's because she hasn't learned to do things differently. And in part, it's because other people have interacted with her in a way that confirms some of those beliefs. So it's back to that model of all those different circles and how they interact with each other. And there are a lot of interactions that she's described that confirm her negative beliefs. And so I'm going to want to change all of those. There was one example of an attempt at positive parenting. And that was, hey, if you get an A, I'll treat you to dinner. So that was a nice initial start at it. But there isn't much evidence of much else in the way of positive parenting.
But the aunt did call the grandmother.
The aunt
Say
called the
she
grandma?
wasn't going to be able to make it, she was working. So
Hey, that's a good point.
Miss Karen didn't see her as being, she was,
Yeah.
thought she was eliminated from the loop, but was give her the message, I can't speak to her, which she said maybe she couldn't call back.
Yeah,
Because she was at work.
that's a great point. Okay. So these things are things that you find in the literature on family environments, family interactions, and depression. So that's why they become targets of change. So the action parent training consists of psychoeducation, teaching the parents positive behavior management strategies, some self-esteem enhancement, recreation, empathic listening, effective communication, family problem solving, conflict resolution, and changing the messages about the child. All right, so you see that there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 9 or 10 different strategies up there, and we're teaching it in 8 meetings. That's a lot, isn't it? So I would have liked to have had more time with the parents to teach the strategies and get away from my criticism of it being just psychoeducation. But it was hard to get the parents in, and I've got some of the information about that for you. And we did have hour and a half, sometimes 2-hour blocks with the parents, so it gave us a fair amount of time. But it would have been nice to have had more time to do this. It's a lot to get covered. So typically we took 1 to 3 weeks. So they're actually, ideally it'd be 1 to 3 weeks, but typically it's 1 to 2 meetings, and we did allow the therapist to schedule extra meetings if the parents didn't understand how to apply the skill with the one meeting. So there was an opportunity to add to it. It was unusual for there actually to be more than 8 parents. They lasted about an hour and a half to 2 hours. They were conducted in the kids' schools in the evening. And as I was mentioning to Paulo yesterday, we provided dinner, transportation, childcare. If they needed baby car seats, whatever, we got it for them to get them to the school. And so it was the neighborhood school. Typically, also the therapist would call each parent and identify a day and time that was convenient for them to meet. So it wasn't like they had to change their schedule to fit. We really went out of our way to make it work for them. Okay, so there were 8 meetings, and the number of parents who attended all 8 meetings was 8, which was 10%. Okay, 7 meetings, we add another 13, so you get another 16%. So really, you only have 27% of the parents making it to the majority of the meetings. And then you can see as you go down, we had 28 parents, 35%, who never even attended a single meeting. Despite we did everything we could possibly do to get them there. So it's really unfortunate that you can't get more parental involvement. And I'm not sure what else you can do. I don't know if anybody else has any ideas for how you can get parents involved, but it's difficult. And I think that kind of shows you why the average number of therapy sessions attended by most kids is 3. You know, it's hard to get the parents to buy into it and bring their kids, and it's hard to get the parents to come and participate in therapy. So what we ended up finding was that, you remember that early slide yesterday? Remember it was about 80% of both groups got better, and there was no advantage to the parent training. But did all the parents get the parent training? They didn't. In fact, 35% didn't get any of it. And if you really think about it, maybe it's like 5 of the meetings. If they had 5 or more, that might have been pretty good, and that would have been 26. About 40, 41, 42% ended up with 5 or more meetings. That's not that many. So obviously, we're going to have to analyze that data with taking into consideration whether the parents attended or not. So we did do that. Paternal figure attendance, pretty pitiful, huh? 67% of the dads never even attended a single meeting. And we tried a whole bunch of different strategies to get them there. We called the dads specifically. We had the males on the research team call the dads because there were a lot of families of Hispanic descent, and so it was more culturally appropriate to have a male call the male figure, and that didn't work. I called the dads. We tried everything, and we still had difficulties getting the dads involved. But that's consistent across the child research. It's hard to get dads involved. And it's really too bad because we know they play an important role. Here's what happens when you do meetings in the home. So there were 8 meetings at school. Remember, the attendance was low. And then there were 2 individual family meetings. And you end up with 31 out of the 43 families meeting both times. So when there isn't the need to get out of the home, and maybe it's because it also isn't a group, it's more of an individual thing, and there's less kind of embarrassment perhaps, the level of attendance goes way up. Okay, so maybe it argues for a different model of parent training and family intervention, and it should be more home-based. Okay, so before we go into the how you do it, I do want you to remember from yesterday that when we actually took into consideration parent attendance, if the parents attended all 8 meetings, their kids were very likely to maintain the improvements over 4 years. 7 meetings, they still were really pretty likely to do it. 6 was still pretty good. 5, it starts to drop off. 4, it drops lower. 3, it drops lower. So when you get the parents involved in the treatment and doing the parent training and making the changes, you get greater maintenance of the treatment effects. So their involvement seems to be really important and seems to contribute to maintenance. So getting them involved, coming up with some creative ways of doing that, maybe doing it in the home is the way to go. That seems to be important, because if you have something like depression, which is an episodic disorder, it's likely to wax and wane over time, and they're likely to become depressed again. Maintenance is really critical. So that's why it's a really important strategy. Now, we did do one other thing for promoting maintenance, and that is we also had booster sessions. So each semester the kids were in school, they met 3 times with their therapist and reviewed the skills and applied them to things that were going on in their life. So, we started with some girls in 7th grade, and by the end of the study, they're juniors in high school. That's a lot of change and a lot of different things to deal with. So I thought it was really important for them to get the help with applying the skills to the new things in their lives. Well, from what I can tell so far from the data, the booster sessions didn't actually add to the maintenance of treatment effects. The only thing that seems to add to the maintenance was the parent training. Okay, so we'll start going through what we did for the parent training. So we started out with some psychoeducation. And if you think about yourself as a parent and your child's depressed, what's going to be your kind of emotional reaction to that? And what are you going to be thinking?
What did I do wrong?
Yeah, there's a lot of guilt. What did I do wrong? I must have messed up my child. And in a lot of the cases, that wasn't true. We had some really wonderful parents. And so, it might have been that there were other things that were going on in the kids' lives, or they may have passed the gene along. There was someone earlier in life, different relative that has it, whatever. So there's a lot of possible reasons for a child developing depression. It's not just because there was bad parenting going on. So we would try to educate the parents about the causes of depression and when feeling badly about it and feeling guilt wasn't warranted, we tried to eliminate that. What are ways that parents misperceive depression in their kids? So a lot of times, actually probably in the majority of the times, the parents didn't think that their child was depressed. Instead, they would think what?
Lazy.
Yep, that's the number one thing. She's just lazy. What else?
It's a phase.
Pardon me? Oh, it's a phase. Yeah, we heard it's a phase a lot. She'll grow out of it. She's just a teenager. It's a phase. Yeah. Other things you can think of?
Crabbiness, because
Okay.
it's variability.
Yeah. Yeah, so she's just crabby. Yeah, she's 13. She's just crabby. That's the way they are.
She's introverted.
Oh, okay. So she's just an introvert. She's shy.
She's like going through changes because like hormonally.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we got a lot of the hormone thing, too. The parents would say that's why. Yep.
Just
Okay.
being rebellious.
Okay, so she's just being rebellious. Uh-huh. All right. So the parents did a lot of that kind of misattributing the child's behavior to and emotions to that. So we did help them to get an understanding of what depression's like. And when they viewed it as that, as depression versus laziness versus it's a phase, it led them to have a very different approach to interacting with their child. So one of the dissertations that was done with this data that was really interesting looked at, it was as a kind of combination of qualitative and quantitative study. And what the student ended up finding was that treatment actually starts at the moment the child's identified. That parents, when they got the phone call that said, or if it was more likely in person because it was during the diagnostic interview and you're going through the different symptoms and the parents endorsing them and you talk about what the daughters had to say and what the parents say and you put it together. You inform the parents that you're offering their daughter the opportunity to participate in the treatment program, that the daughter appears to be depressed. At that point, then the parents reported pretty big shifts in what they would do. So we had, when the grad student went back and interviewed the parents, they ended up finding things like her father and I stopped arguing in front of her. We reduced the conflict in the family. We started to take her out and do more things with her. We got her enrolled in voice lessons, and we got her playing guitar, and we did this and we did that with her. I started working less of the time so I could spend more time with her. All sorts of things went on. One of the things we didn't expect was that the teachers, when they found out that certain girls were in our program and they knew the program was for depression, we forgot and I kind of overlooked the fact that the teachers would do things differently. So teachers would literally, they thought, okay, a child's depressed, I need to get that person more engaged with other kids in the classroom. So they started to pair up the girls in our program more with other kids in the classroom. And they would be more nurturant to that student, more understanding. They would point out the positives more to that kid. They would joke more with her. So fortunately, we had a minimal contact control condition, so we had a control condition that controlled for all those kinds of things happening. But it also explained why I think it was like 47% of the kids that didn't receive treatment still got better. Some of it was because depression gets better over time, and some of it was because people go through and they do all these things once they learn that the kid's depressed. So anyway, it's just important to keep in mind that you start the change process right away, and then the change process at home starts as soon as the child's identified. We did teach that real simplified model of depression, and that's that kids become depressed because undesirable things happen to them, and they aren't sure how to cope with those things, and they don't know how to solve problems. And they also get depressed because they think in a negative way. And then the thing that I think sold this program to the schools was that we also told them the simplified model of how we're going to treat the kids. We're going to teach them coping skills, problem solving, and to think more positively. That's pretty attractive because, as we were talking about before break, there's a kind of naive psychology. And that naive thought is everybody needs to know how to cope, solve problems, and to think positively. So for the principals and the superintendents of the schools, it made a lot of sense. Everybody could benefit from that. What would you guess the teachers told us when we had the teacher meetings? What did they say?
Do it for all the kids.
Well, they wanted it for all the kids and the teachers. They said, hey, how about putting together a program for us? You know, we've got a lot of stress. I'd like to learn how to solve problems. And others, you know, I want to think positively too. So it makes sense. It's attractive. And imagine if we had gone in and we had said to them, well, we're going to teach the girls that, you know, that their problem is their relationship with their mother and that they are not differentiating properly from their mother and on and on and on into this kind of complex psychoanalytic stuff, they would have said, that's that psychology, it's all BS, forget it, you know? So the model made sense, and it makes sense to parents. And so as we were talking about at lunch, we had 185 girls who were identified as depressed. Remember, so I didn't tell you the process that we went through. So we screened entire schools for a number of years. We sent home 7,793 permission letters over 5 years. And we ended up getting about 45% rate of approval. So it's about almost 3,800 kids we got approval for screening. They completed the Children's Depression Inventory or the Beck Depression Inventory. And then if they came up as a positive screen, they were interviewed with a 15-minute DSM depression interview. They came up positive there. They were interviewed with the Schedule for Affective Disorders and Schizophrenia diagnostic interview, and their primary caregiver was interviewed. So we started with about 3,800 kids. We ended up with 185 that were depressed. And of the 185 that were depressed, we had 151 parents who gave permission for their kids to participate in treatment. So that was a pretty good rate, especially when you consider they weren't seeking treatment. And so I think in part it was because it's an attractive idea. My kid's going to learn coping skills. That's cool. I'd like her to have coping skills. It's a rough world out there. She's going to learn problem solving. Everybody needs problem solving. And what's the harm in learning to think positively? So the rationale, I think, fit, and it led to a lot of parents agreeing to do it. Now, we want the parents that participate in the parent training to recognize that they're models for their kids. And so we're going to want them to learn the same skills that their daughters are learning, because then they can model those skills for their daughters. Okay? We want them to be coaches, so we want them to help their daughters learn how to use the skills, and we want them to be the cheerleaders who are kind of like being positive and reinforcing them for learning the skills. And then in the first session, we end up introducing coping skills to the parents. And we emphasize the families becoming more recreationally active, so having more fun as a family. And when when you think about it, it's hard for the families today to have a lot of fun. You've got both parents working, often more than one job. And so finding time to have recreation is really difficult for them. So we've talked, and I think a number of you maybe do PCIT. And so, that's pretty labor intense, and you got to get a lot of parent time for them to learn to do it. And part of the PCIT is that kind of positive time with the child. So when I've done it, actually I've used more of Barclay's stuff, which is very similar. I found that it's hard for the parents to find time to set aside to have one-on-one time with their child. Do you all have that same experience?
Yeah, I've noticed that too. They find it kind of challenging, even though we only say 5 minutes. But
Wow. So you only say 5 minutes, huh? And I usually ask for 20 to 30.
and they still find it challenging at times.
Yeah. Holy cow. Can you imagine not having even 5 minutes of time for your child? Wow. That's really something. That's really sad. So I guess you'd have to, wow, we got to really think about priorities there, don't we? So let's see. All right, so it is difficult but important to get the families recreationally active. Okay, so we are going to teach the parents positive behavior management strategies. But remember that depressed children are irritable and often kind of oppositional and coercive. So that sets up this kind of coercive pattern that's dominated by punishment. And as a result, it's really important to shift to a more positive model. And if you're using punishment all the time, what's the message to the child? Pardon me? Yeah, unlovable, bad kid. So it's back to that idea that kids try to make sense out of what's going on around them, and if they're getting punished all the time, the conclusion they come to is, I must be unlovable or bad. So we want to help reverse that and use more positive strategies. Oh, there it is right there. Okay. Yeah.
Suppose the situation is that the parents, they don't set any limits or guidelines, and so children they get to do whatever they want to do. At any point, do you say, is there some kind of structure?
Sure.
That is good?
Absolutely. Yeah, so you'd want to help the parents learn a nice balance between positive procedures and limit setting and consequences. We just don't want them to be dominated by the punitive methods. Okay. Okay, so we want to switch to using positive methods as the primary means. And parents are taught the principles of reinforcement and the impact that it has on the kid's self-esteem. So what are the principles of reinforcement? If you're using reinforcement effectively, what should you do?
You're genuinely, consistently.
Consistency. What else? Immediate. Good. What else? Yeah, you got to use a reward that's real, that's meaningful for the kids. So I had a parent one time that I was working with who said, well, his reward is on Saturdays, he gets to ride with me while I run my errands. I know. Yeah, but the dad was sincere. He really thought that was really great. And so, it wasn't working. Obviously, it wasn't rewarding for the kid. Okay, so we're at 3 o'clock. So now we take a 15-minute break. So we come back and we'll work some more on the parent training component. Okay, so we're down to the last hour and a half of time. So you all have done a great job of hanging in there, and I appreciate that. So we're going to now, hopefully in that time, talk through what are the remaining components of the parent training intervention. So I think I'll have to be kind of quick about that, and then we'll save time at the end to answer any questions that you have about any of the intervention. So from the material that was covered after lunch, I think that what I want you to remember from that is that the cognitive restructuring has to be done within the therapeutic relationship, and that it has to be really a good, strong therapeutic relationship. Because if it isn't, then it's possible that the child could misinterpret what you're doing. So let's keep in mind that that goes back to the slide yesterday when we talked about the importance of the therapeutic relationship, and that it creates that safe context in which you do the work and you train all those skills. And that there are a number of different approaches or kind of strategies, I guess, you could use to do the restructuring. You could use what Beck calls the less elegant, inelegant way, and that's where you just get the kids to replace their negative thoughts with coping thoughts. And then you could use the more elegant strategies that involve catching the negative thoughts, evaluating them, and changing them. And we talked about a number of different strategies you can use for doing that. The ones that we used with the 9 to 13-year-old girls was what's the evidence, and what's another way of looking at it, the alternative interpretation strategy. Then we also mentioned that there's the what if strategy, what would I tell my best friend, and the self-disclosure kind of cognitive modeling. And that the most effective, powerful way to change the way that the kids are thinking is to set up a behavioral experiment. And I think Paula over lunch, or was it right before lunch? It was right before lunch. We talked about the parallels between treatment of anxiety and depression, and wouldn't it be cool to set up these behavioral experiments kind of like exposures for the depressed kids? And would that be then as powerful as the exposure interventions for anxiety? Which is really a cool idea and a different way of thinking about the cognitive restructuring, and maybe even a more developmentally appropriate way of doing it too. So that would be a really cool study, really great dissertation, and potentially a real contribution to the field if it worked. So, okay. Then we are now going to move, where we started to move into the parent training. And the reason that we are going to include the parent training is that evidence shows that for the treatment of depression, there's greater maintenance of treatment effects if you do the parent training program. But as I mentioned, it's difficult to get the parents to do it. And that's, I don't know, as a field, I guess we got to come up with new ways to make it happen. Maybe it involves getting out of our offices and going more into the homes. That might do it. Okay, so the first part of the positive kind of behavior management is that you do the psychoeducation, and then you're starting to teach the parents the principles of reinforcement. And in the second meeting, the kids actually attended half of the parent training meetings. Okay? So what's the advantage to having the girls in the meetings? The parents get to try out the things with the kids right there. So it gives them practice while you, as the therapist, get to coach the parents in how they do it. So I went into this with the belief that teaching the parents positive behavior management was going to be quick and easy, but it really wasn't. And so we have a strand of positive behavior management that runs through the first 4 meetings, and it's there every time the girls are there. So that means, there's 4 sessions plus 2 of the second half, so 6 meetings where we're actually coaching the parents in their use of positive behavior management. So at the beginning of the meeting, the therapist would hand out these coupons that would say things like, you get to stay up for an extra 10 minutes. You get an extra hug tonight. Things like that on them. And the parents had a stack of them, and their task while the meeting was going on was to practice positive behavior management in the meeting. So we helped them identify what are the desirable behaviors that you want to see in your daughter during the meeting, and we want you to catch it and reinforce it. And the therapist would act as coaches to that. So it really took a lot of work to get the parents to recognize those positive behaviors and remember, oh yeah, I've got to reinforce it. So anyways, I was a little surprised at that, but it runs throughout the intervention program. So we taught the parents to think about what they'd like their child to do differently and how to put that into positive terms. So instead of, I want her to be less lazy, it would be, I'd like her to pick up her room when I ask her to pick up her room. I want her to do what I ask her to do when I ask her to do it. Something like that. So we'd have them frame it in the positive way, and then we'd end up, in this case, kind of priming it, because the kids are in the meeting and they know what their parents want them to do differently, and so it hopefully increases the odds of them doing it. So we're in fact creating pretty clear communication. And the kids also know if they do it, they are going to get these rewards for it. And they also know that the therapists are going to ask next week whether the parents gave the rewards or not. So their parents are being held accountable. So the odds of the parents doing it are, higher. The kids also noted where they could use more encouragement. And so they would say things like, I really hate algebra, and it would help me a lot if you encouraged me to do my homework. When I did it, if you said, that's really great, you're working hard, it's wonderful. That kind of thing. So the kids pointed out areas where their parents could be more encouraging. So on the one hand, we're getting the parents to reinforce the kids for change, and we're getting the parents to identify areas where they want their kids to change, but we're also getting from the kids in a fairly positive frame where they want their parents to change. So it feels a little mutual, which is a little more palatable. Kind of 11, 12, 13-year-olds, they want to see some equity and change. They don't want it all to be expected to be on their side. So we used education, modeling, role plays, coaching, feedback to help the parents to use the reinforcement strategies. And we encouraged the kids to participate by displaying positive behaviors. So, as we mentioned before, with the role play with Karen, it's going to be hard if I taught her aunt and her grandmother how to use reinforcement. It would be hard for them to use it if she remains fairly coercive and doesn't, and is fairly rebellious and doesn't do things that elicit the reinforcement. So we also have to encourage the kids to be more compliant and to do the things that their parents really want them to do. And then one of the things that I really appreciated in listening and sometimes watching, because we actually videotaped a lot of the parent training sessions, was the impact of the daughters describing how it felt to get rewarded. And parents were really surprised at how good it made them feel and how happy it made them. And how it led to them thinking positively about themselves. So just having the girls describe that experience led to some motivation on the parents' part. Okay, you all mentioned this before, how to use reinforcement effectively, truly desirable, contingent on the kid doing it, immediate, and consistent. So the parents actually had a parent workbook, and this slide, so to speak, that page was in their workbook to remind them. Outcomes of reinforcement increases probability of desired behavior, positive feelings in the household. Remember that the households where there are depressed kids often have this real negative kind of emotional cloud around them. So we're going to want to change that to being more positive. Positive feelings towards the person giving reinforcement and positive feelings towards the self. And that's the coupon thing that we used in a lot of the meetings. Okay. Compliments. Again, this one was surprising, a little surprising to me. And maybe it's because I'm more of an optimist naturally. But I was shocked at how few times the kids got complimented. And then I actually thought about it, and I thought, wait a minute, when was the last time I got a compliment? You know, we don't do that much. And that's really unfortunate because for the kids, that's very powerful. It's a source of information because it tells them what they're doing well. And it leads to some boost in self-esteem. So we talked with the parents about using compliments as a form of reinforcement, and that praise really is reinforcing, and it's a source of motivation, and that real specific compliments or praise are more effective because they really provide information about what you like. And so the therapists modeled that throughout the parent training. So they were consistently praising the parents for what they did well. They praised the parents for being there. They praised the parents for putting in the effort to come, and on and on. So they were really using lots of praise. And they used it with the kids as well. So we did a lot of modeling of it. Also in the second meeting, we reviewed coping skills. And the nice part of this, with having the girls present, was that we had the girls describe the coping skills, the 5 different coping skills, and how they use them, and how the parents might use them. And we ended up getting kind of funny stories over time in the parent training meetings, and that a parent would say, you know, I had a really rough day at work. I came home, I was all stressed out, and Sherry said, why don't you use one of your action skills? And maybe you, Mom, what you should do is something fun. Or maybe you should do something that's relaxing, Mom. So the kids, we'd have them in the meetings demonstrate how to use the skills and teach their parents how to use them. But the kids also got really good at cueing their parents to use those skills. We were really counting on the parents cueing the kids, but the kids got really good at cueing the parents. But on the bright side, what do we know about if you teach someone else how to do something? It's a better memory stick. So that worked out pretty well. This was another one that was really nice to see, but I was a little bit surprised at. I mentioned it before. We had the kids and the parents do something together for fun in the meeting. And you watched these depressed kids go from being very depressed to giggling, laughing, and having fun with their parents. And the parents were really blown away by it. They would say, I just didn't understand how powerful this is or how much impact that has on my child to do that. I think we're going to start playing games together at home. Where can we buy this? Where can we get that? We ended up having games that the parents could check out and take home and use with their kids. And that seemed to be useful. A lot of parents end up using them. And then we would end each of the parent meetings where the kids were there with what's wonderful about my daughter. So they had to, in session, praise their daughter. And that worked pretty well. The parents did a pretty good job of it. We also would have, towards the end of treatment, we had the girls say what's wonderful about my parent. Most of the kids did really well at it. There were a couple that had a real hard time with it. They were so angry that they couldn't really do it. And so that would require a lot of coaching ahead of time because that was pretty rough on the parents.